So we come to our last day in this course on the Continental Reformation. We've got a couple of hours of teaching together. So the plan is this first hour or so will be on the Catholic Reformation, and then the final hour will be looking at some of the so whats. And as you've heard, I've asked you to produce some videos. It looks like we'll have about 4 videos or so on the so whats to put up. We'll have a discussion together at about 11:15 on Thursday next week, and then another one at, I would suggest, about 12:15, so that we can round up together what you've thought about, not only from today's teaching, but also from what you've thought about over the whole of the time of this course. So this hour of teaching is on the Catholic Reformation, also known as the Counter-Reformation. If you look at a map of religion across Europe from about 1950, before we got quite the same moving around as we've had in the 21st century, you see some quite clear blocks. I'll put such a map in your notes. It'd probably be better to look at the map in your notes because the video is reversing everything. And you'll see to the left of the map and to the south of the map, so that's to the west and to the south, there's a large block of Catholic countries. Doesn't mean everybody who lives there is a Catholic, but that's the majority religion. To the east, we have the Eastern Orthodox churches, and then to the south of that, we have the Muslim countries, with some interesting small ones in between, where we have things like Armenian Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox. To the north, we have the Protestant countries, so Scandinavia, parts of Germany, England, Wales and Scotland, Denmark, Iceland. Quite a clear block of countries that either descend Lutheran or, in the case of England, our own particular version, where many would say we are both Protestant and Catholic. We recognise being part of the Catholic Church. We've kept the orders of deacons, priests and bishops, but yet we accepted a Reformation in the 16th century. Many of the insights that Luther had were adopted into the liturgy of the Church of England. You could also, if you wish, because of Cranmer's amazing ability to put in words which could be understood in different ways, you could be a full Zwinglian and still be happy to be part of the Church of England. And yet it was possible in Elizabeth's day for many to see themselves still as very much in continuity with what had gone before. The only difference now was that they were worshipping with the priest leading in English as opposed to having led in Latin. An east-west divide based on the Great Schism of 1054, a north-south divide from the Reformation. But it's not that there were no reform-minded thinkers in the south of Europe in the 16th century. In Spain, for this period, we have a rich growth of individual saints aspiring an individual reformation. This is the area of Cardinal Francisco Jimenez de Cisnero. He worked in Rome in 1459 as a consistorial advocate. What that means is he went to the ecclesial courts and argued a case there. He brought cases to the Roman Curia for decision. The then Pope Pius II decided to give him a benefit in Spain as his reward. And so he was sent back there in 1465 with a letter from the Pope giving him possession of the next vacant benefice. The Archbishop of Toledo resented this interference and presumably thought that as soon as Jimenez had got his benefice, he'd be back to Rome, just now with a nice little income, leaving somebody else to look after the benefice in his stead. So the Archbishop refused to give it to him. And Jimenez insisted. He was imprisoned for 6 years because he refused to give up his claim. Eventually, in 1480, the Archbishop cracked and gave him the benefice. Now, Jimenez, wanting to get as far away from the Archbishop as he could, quickly traded it for a chaplaincy. He became a Franciscan friar in 1484. He didn't return to Rome, but he stayed in Spain. And in time, he was the confessor and advisor to Queen Isabella of Castile. Because up to this point, Spain had been split into two kingdoms, the Kingdom of Castile, the Kingdom of Aragon. Her husband was the King of Ferdinand of Aragon, and so together they ruled both kingdoms in Spain. She was the one who insisted that Jews convert to Christianity or leave Spain. She was probably advised by Jimenez. She persuaded the Pope to make Jimenez the Archbishop of Toledo in 1495 and also Chancellor of Castile, which was a senior position in her government. Now, he resisted this appointment for 6 months. He felt himself happy to be a simple friar, but in the end he was ordered to by the Pope. So he set to reform the Franciscan order in Spain. He insisted they gave up having concubines and really be celibate. He made the ordained friars live in the parish where they worked and made them preach every Sunday. Despite intense opposition, he started to extend these reforms to other orders. And he also felt that those who preached should have a training first. They should have some understanding of the Bible. So he started a university at Alcalá de Henares. The Latin name for that place was Complutum. And in time, nearly all the religious orders had houses there for their novices to be trained. He also backed the creation of a polyglot version of the Bible with the Greek, Latin, and Hebrew versions of the Old Testament printed in parallel versions. And this is known as the Complutensian Polyglot and was published in 1517. And it's likely that because of his reforms in Spain, it was less vulnerable to the claims of the reformer. If you remember, they had real issues with clerical celibacy really being ignored or people buying their way out of it. They had issues with the nature of the religious orders seeming to live an easy life. They had issues with the sale of benefices, people having the income but not doing the work. All those were things that Jimenez corrected in Spain. And so in Spain, what we see is less something which is aimed at trying to address the structures of the church and more at trying to change the inner life of the Christian. So, for example, Spain was the home of Saint Teresa of Avila, 1515 to 1582. She developed her thinking in this time. She was born into a wealthy family, a grandfather who was one of the converso, those Jews who had been forced to convert to Christianity or to emigrate. Now, he had a later run-in with the Spanish Inquisition when they thought he'd relapsed to Judaism. Oh yes, Jimenez was quite happy to use the Spanish Inquisition. One of Teresa's grandfather's sons, her father, Alonso Sanchez de Cepeda, was a successful wool merchant. Teresa's mother, Beatriz, was his second wife. He already had children by his first wife. But she raised her daughter to be a very pious young lady. And when Beatrice died, when Teresa was just 11, it looks like her daughter turned to the Virgin Mary as her spiritual mother. She entered the local Carmelite convent in 1536, and as she lived her life there, she read on contemplative prayer. She became ill, probably due to her regular mortifications of the flesh. But while she was ill, she found it had deepened her prayer to what she called devotions of ecstasy and perfect union with God. In 1550, she had many visions of Jesus. And since she wrote down nearly everything she experienced, we can read of that now. She was disturbed in her prayers in the Carmelite monastery, and she resisted and resented the intrusion of the local laity who did the disturbing. And so she founded a reformed Carmelite convent in 1562. Here the sisters had ceremonial flagellation every week and were discalced, shoeless. This comes from Exodus chapter 3:5, where Moses is told by God to take off his shoes because he's on holy ground. Teresa devoted herself to prayer and writing, including her autobiography and The Interior Castle. Another Spaniard who looked for a more inner transformation was Ignatius of Loyola, who published his spiritual exercises in 1548, but more of him and the Jesuits later. Another Spaniard was assessing his inner life, and that was Juan de Valdez, who was born in about 1490, died in 1541. Another scion of a wealthy family, the youngest son of Fernando de Valdez, who was a regidor of Cuenca in Castile. Regidors were the person who represented their local town in the wider council of the kingdom. So probably a bit like a duke. Now, Fernando de Valdez's slightly older twin brother was Alfonso, and he was a courtier of Charles V, King of Spain from 1516, Holy Roman Emperor from 1519, also Archduke of Austria, Lord of the Netherlands, Duke of Burgundy. You get the idea. Charles V basically was the European Union way before the European Union was thought of. Johann studied at Jimenez University at Alcalá. In 1528, he published his Dialogue of Mercury and Charon. That contained criticisms of the corruptions of the Roman Church. He fled Spain for fear of the Inquisition, and he went to Naples in 1530. In 1531, he moved to Rome, where he was accepted since his dialogue also had other information, including his backing the Pope over the matter of Catherine of Aragon. He attracted others to his circle. He wrote on the need for the spiritual reformation of the Church. He translated parts of the Bible into Spanish, and it's quite likely he read Martin Luther's works. Among those in this circle around Valdez were Gasparo Contarini and Reginald Pole, both later to become cardinals. The latter, Pole, was exiled from England because he disagreed with Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon being annulled. Valdez was probably not much interested in reforming church structures, but did want people to be inspired by scripture into greater depths of their spirit. And his followers were called spirituali. They included also Sadoleto and Caffarà. And these two, with Pole and Contarini, were made cardinals by Pope Pius III. Others in Italy sought renewal. Giles of Viterbo spoke at the Second Lateran Council in 1517 and said, unless by this council or by some other means we place a limit on our morals, unless we force our greedy desire for human things, the source of evils, to yield to the love of divine things, it's all over with Christendom. Practically, in Italy, as it's now called, there were oratories of divine love, started in Genoa and then in Rome. The oratory in Genoa was founded at the end of the 15th century to gather alms for the poor, and in 1499 a hospital for incurables was formed. The oratory in Rome was formed about 1517, so that both clergy and laity could meet in the church of Santi Silvestri e Dorotea to discuss church reform. It was originally an exclusive society with 4 priests and 36 laymen, committed to shared prayers, fasting, caring for the sick, visiting those in prison. And as cardinals, Carafa, Sadoletta, and Contarini were among its members. This is also the period where we see new orders in the church. The Capuchins were formed as a more faithful version of Franciscans. This order was started in 1525 when Matteo de Bascio of the Marche region of Italy felt inspired by God to recover the initial spirit of St. Francis. He looked for solitude and penance. He was denounced by his superiors for abandoning his religious duties, but was taken in by the Camaldolese monks who lived near Arezzo in central Italy. There, he and those who went with him adopted the distinctive hood of the Camaldolese in gratitude to them, and also took to wearing beards. The name Capuchin comes from the capucce, which means the hood. The Ursulines, another order, come from this period. Founded in 1535 at Brescia by Angela Merici. I'm not very good at these 12 names, sorry. Merici, who lived between 1474 and 1540. The order was from the start committed to educating girls and caring for the sick. The St. Ursula, for whom they are named, is a legendary Romano-British saint who died in 383, who with her virgin companions were martyred by the Huns in Cologne. She also was the patron saint of education in the medieval church. The sisters were to live and work among the people they served, without anything to distinguish them, so they didn't wear a religious habit. The foci of so many of these were inner piety and outward service. What they didn't do was question the way the church itself was run. So let's look at the church, and in particular the popes who were running it in the 16th century. After Leo X, who died in 1521 and who was the pope who tried to excommunicate, in fact did excommunicate Luther, Adrian VI was elected. Adrian Florenzi Wien was the only Dutchman ever to have been pope. His papacy began on the 5th of January 1522, and he was the last non-Italian pope until John Paul II, 455 years later. He was professor of theology at the University of Leuven and then became a tutor to the future Charles V. When Charles V was King of Castile and Aragon, therefore King of Spain, he appointed Adrian to be Bishop of Tolosa in Spain. And Adrian became the Grand Inquisitor in Spain. He was made a cardinal in 1517 and was appointed to be the Pope in 1521 as a compromise candidate when Leo died. Now he saw Luther clearly as a heretic, but at the Diet of Nuremberg, 1522-23, he admitted that the problems in the church were due to corruption in the Roman Curia, and so he attempted to reform it. However, he was resisted by those serving under him who benefited from those corruptions. In particular, he was stopped from stopping the sale of curia offices and benefices because it was believed that would have bankrupted the papacy. As Carter Lindbergh says, he frankly confessed the corruption had begun at the top and vowed to begin the renewal of the church by the reform of the papacy. His challenge was purga Roma, purgator mundus, to cleanse Rome in order to cleanse the world. Addressing the German Diet in 1523, Adrian wrote, "Concerning ourselves, you may promise that we will do everything so that first this see, from whom this evil powerfully progressed, will be reformed, so that even as corruption came from there in all the lower parts, likewise from there healing and reform may emanate. No one should be astonished if we will not correct all error and abuse at once. The disease is too long established and not simple, but varied and complex." But the times were against Adrian. The Italians looked down on him for his rude Latin and lack of Renaissance sophistication. Elected in 1522, he died in September 1523. His epitaph read, "Alas, how the power of even a most righteous man depends upon the time in which he happens to live." He was followed by Clement VII, who was a Medici, not of Florence, but of Milan. And he realised the seriousness of the situation in the church and sought reconciliation with the Lutherans. He preferred to spend his time on the arts than on duties of his office, and so sent others to do his work. So it was that Cardinal Campeggio went in his stead to the Diet of Nuremberg in 1424 with the offer of wine and women to the Lutherans. But now the divisions were deep and just whether clergy could marry and the laity receive wine, and this attempt failed. The Lutherans were demanding a council of the church, a council not under the authority of the Pope, held in Germany under the authority of the Emperor, in similar ways to which the original ecumenical councils had been called by the Emperor, not by any one particular patriarch. Clement VII stalled on this idea for 12 years, finally consenting to some sort of council in 1532. But when he died in 1534, he still hadn't convened it. He was followed by Paul III, who, as Alexander Farnese, was a petticoat cardinal, so called because he was made a cardinal at the age of 25 because his sister was a mistress of Pope Alexander VI. He joined the Roman Curia in 1491 and became cardinal deacon of Santi Cosma e Damiano in 1493. In his younger years, he took a mistress, Silvia Ruffini, with whom he had 3 sons and 2 daughters. One of his first actions as Pope was to make 2 of his teenage grandsons cardinals. However, when he was Bishop of Parma, he'd broken his relationship with his mistress and reformed his diocese. Despite his appointing his grandsons as cardinals, he was accepted by those in favour of reform, since he also appointed Reginald Pole, Gasparo Contarini, Jacopo Sodeletto, and Giovanni Pietro Carafa as cardinals. He called for a general council in 1536, and to prepare for it set 9 well-respected clergy to prepare a report of the renewal of the church. This is called the Concilium et Emendenda Ecclesia, or the Council for the Amendment of the Church, and it was produced in 1537. This was honest about abuses in the Curia and proposed ways of getting rid of these abuses. The report was widely printed, but to the Protestants it did not go nearly far enough. Martin Luther produced his own version with a preface with a vignette showing the cardinals cleaning the Augean stable of the Roman Curia using foxtails for brooms. The council never happened. This Paul III excommunicated Henry VIII in 1538 and issued an interdict which banned services from happening in England. But since Henry had claimed from 1534 to be the supreme head of the Church of England, this didn't actually have any impact. Paul III was still open, though, to the Lutherans returning to the fold of the Catholic Church, and so set Contarini and others to negotiating with some of the Lutherans to find a way forward. The colloquy of Regensburg was held in April 1541 because the Holy Roman Emperor was keen to have peace in Germany, because he was facing the Ottoman Turks and he wanted a united empire to face them. The Catholics were represented by clergy Groper, Pflug and Eck. And they were overseeing, that group, by Contarini. The Protestants were represented by Bucer, Johannes Pistorius and Melanchthon, who was a person who worked alongside Luther. Now, some issues were agreed quickly. On free will, the cause of sin, on original sin, those were all settled, no problem. But once the issue of justification was reached, the hard work began. By the end of May, something had been worked out even on that. Nothing could be done, though, on the doctrinal authority of the Church or the nature of the sacraments. But the Emperor still hoped that some form of agreement could be patched together based on what had been done. So the results were sent to Luther and sent to the Pope. But Luther made it quite clear that he would only consent if the Roman Catholics accepted certain concessions they were unlikely to agree to. Meanwhile, Contarini returned to Rome. The item on justification was rejected there as well. Rome said that only a council of the whole church, not just a German get-together, could decide the matter. Some of the Catholic rulers urged the emperor to act against the Protestants with force, but he refused. And because of this, some of the Roman party started to treat the emperor with mistrust. Contarini himself was put under house arrest in Rome by the Roman Inquisition, and he died in 1542. In 1545, the council discussed the matters raised by the Reformation was finally started in Ponto, in Italy, also known as Trent. I think that's enough for this one piece of video. The next piece of video you can watch whenever you wish.